Right now, at the bottom of the world, there is a continent the size of the United States and Mexico combined. It holds 70% of Earth's fresh water. It sits on more than 135 billion tons of coal and untold reserves of oil, gold, and iron ore. And no one is allowed to touch any of it. No country owns it. No corporation can drill it. No military can set up a base there for anything other than science. And the terrifying part is not that the rules exist. The terrifying part is how thin they actually are. Antarctica is not a country. It has no government, no native citizens, no flag. What it has is a piece of paper, the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 12 nations, now ratified by 56. And that paper is the only thing standing between the most resource-rich wilderness on the planet and the most powerful militaries and corporations in human history. Stop and sit with that for a second. Your planet has a continent that no one owns, and that is not normal. In the entire history of human civilization, powerful nations have never left land on the table. When they found it, they claimed it. When they claimed it, they fought over it. Every inch of every continent on Earth was colonized, carved up, traded and bled over, except this one. And if you want to understand why that is terrifying, you first have to understand how it happened. The year is 1908. Britain claims a wedge of Antarctica. Argentina and Chile follow with overlapping claims that slice into each other. Norway stakes a claim. France claims a frozen sliver. Australia asserts dominion over 42% of the continent in 1933, more territory than most empires ever controlled. By the 1950s, 7 nations have carved Antarctica into pie-slice sections on a map. The problem is, none of them can actually enforce it. The continent is impossibly remote, brutally cold, and utterly hostile to the kind of sustained human presence that makes territorial control real. Then something strange happens. The International Geophysical Year of 1957 to 1958 brings scientists from 12 nations together to study the continent cooperatively. Geophysicist Lloyd Berkner, who helped organize the effort, noticed something remarkable. For one brief moment, the Cold War had been set aside. American and Soviet scientists were sharing data, exchanging findings, sitting at the same table. Berkner pushed for that spirit to be made permanent. And in 1959, 12 nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, who could barely agree on anything, signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington, D.C. The treaty froze all territorial claims. It banned military activity, nuclear testing, and nuclear waste disposal. It declared the continent a zone of scientific cooperation, open to inspection by any signatory at any time, with no warning required. It was, by almost any measure, one of the most idealistic and successful diplomatic agreements in history. Researcher Lorraine Elliott, who has studied international environmental governance for decades, has called it a model of cooperative governance in a region with no natural constituency. And she is right. It works. On paper. But here is where your instincts should start to tingle. The treaty was not born purely from idealism. It was born from stalemate. The United States refused to recognize any of the 7 territorial claims. The Soviet Union also refused. 2 superpowers, each unwilling to acknowledge anyone else's right to the land, found it easier to freeze the whole situation than to fight over it. The Antarctic Treaty is, at its core, a monument to a standoff. And standoffs, by definition, are only as stable as the power behind them. The resources sitting under that ice are not a secret. In 1980, a separate agreement called the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources was signed to protect the ecosystem. In 1988, parties negotiated the Convention on the Regulation of Antarctic Mineral Resource Activities, a framework that would have allowed mining under tight restrictions. Environmental groups pushed back hard. In 1991, that mining convention was abandoned and replaced by the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, also known as the Madrid Protocol. It banned all mining and mineral extraction for 50 years. That 50-year moratorium expires in 2048. 2048 is not far away. And the world between now and then is not going to get less hungry for resources. Consider what is at stake. Geologist Alan Cooper, in research published through the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, has estimated that the continental shelf alone may hold recoverable oil reserves in the billions of barrels. The land mass beneath the ice contains one of the largest coal deposits on Earth. Rare earth elements, the minerals that power electric vehicles, smartphones and military technology, are present in quantities that have not been fully mapped, because the treaty restricts the kind of drilling needed to map them. Antarctica also sits above what scientists believe are vast reservoirs of natural gas. The continent is not a frozen wasteland, it is a frozen vault, and the nations circling it know it. China has been quietly but aggressively expanding its Antarctic presence for years. Where the original 12 signatories of the treaty operated a handful of research stations, China now operates 5, with a 6th under construction. Researchers Anne-Marie Brady, a political scientist at the University of Canterbury, has documented in careful detail how China's Antarctic program has shifted from purely scientific to strategically dual purpose. The stations are positioned in locations with logistical value that goes well beyond meteorology. They are capable of supporting communications infrastructure, deep-sea research, and, critically, the kind of sustained presence that historically precedes territorial assertion. Russia has not been idle either. Russian expeditions have used deep ice drilling technology to penetrate Lake Vostok, a liquid freshwater lake buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice, under the justification of scientific research. The drilling capabilities developed in that process are directly transferable to mineral extraction. None of this is illegal under the current treaty framework. That is precisely the point. The treaty permits scientific activity. It does not define the boundary between scientific activity and strategic positioning with any meaningful precision, and the nations doing the positioning know that. You should also know this: the Antarctic Treaty has no enforcement mechanism. There is no Antarctic court, no Antarctic police, no military force authorized to expel a violator. The entire system runs on voluntary compliance and diplomatic pressure. In a world where voluntary compliance and diplomatic pressure have been increasingly strained, that is a fragile architecture. Now consider climate change. The Antarctic ice sheet is melting, slowly but measurably. As it melts, it will eventually expose land that has been sealed under ice for millions of years. Land that, once exposed, will need to be legally classified as something. Under the current treaty, its status is frozen alongside the territorial claims. But frozen things, it turns out, do not stay frozen. The Madrid Protocol's mining ban can theoretically be lifted after 2048 if a majority of the original 26 consultative parties agree, but crucially, any one of those parties can block a change. The United States and Russia each hold an effective veto. So does Australia, Chile, Argentina, and the United Kingdom. The system was designed to require consensus, which makes dramatic change hard. But it also makes adaptation to a changing world hard. And the world is changing dramatically. Journalist and researcher Elizabeth Lean, who has written extensively on Antarctic politics and culture, has observed that the continent occupies a unique space in the human imagination, remote, pristine, shared, that makes it almost mythological. We talk about Antarctica the way we talk about something sacred, But sacred is not a legal category, and the nations with Antarctic programs are not run by mythologies. They are run by strategic interests. Here is the truth. Your textbooks rarely say plainly, the Antarctic Treaty works because the nations that signed it have decided for now that it is more useful to them intact than broken. That calculation is not permanent. It is contingent on a world where no single power believes it can seize and hold Antarctic territory faster than the others can respond, and where the cost of cooperation is lower than the cost of conflict. As climate change shifts the accessibility of Antarctic resources, as new technologies make extraction more feasible in extreme cold, and as the geopolitical balance of the 21st century reshapes alliances and rivalries, that calculation will be stress-tested in ways the 1959 signatories never imagined. There is a continent at the bottom of the world. It holds the keys to freshwater security, energy reserves, and rare materials that will define the next century of human civilization. A piece of paper says, "No one can touch it." And every major power on Earth is already positioning itself for the moment that paper becomes negotiable. Tonight, when you check the news and read about superpower tensions, resource competition, or climate summits, you are watching the early chapters of a story whose most consequential setting is a place most people will never visit, a frozen continent that nobody can touch. For now.